fucking sleep at night. Blew up for the 1,000th time. Guess I'm always lucky, right? Pop some shit, then fall behind. I jump the gun and take what's mine. Looking like you seen a ghost, moving like a poltergeist. Like, wait, what's his name? I'm like,
hey guys, welcome back to Hella Spooky. And today we're talking about one of my favorite things, vampires. If you couldn't tell. And yes, I do have red lipstick all over my fangs. And I'm also having a hard time talking with the fangs on. But if that drives you insane, or you're just tuning into the podcast and not watching today, I promise it's not like this the whole episode. While I tell the story, I am not wearing the fangs. So just bear with me. Or maybe skip a little bit through the intro and get to today's story if you want to kind of skip through this. But I'm so excited to be back for another episode. I hope you guys have been having a great holiday if you celebrate, and more holidays around the corner. It is getting rather cold where I live, so stay warm if you're in a cold area too. It's my favorite time of the year. I'm all nice and cozy, and although I'm already starting to miss fall because I feel like we're just kind of shooting right into winter, this is like that in between where I just live. I live my best life. Tonight's actually perfect. It's drizzling outside and it's nice and crispy and cool, and it's all of the things I love. But today we are talking about the tales of Count Dracula and a little bit more history about where vampires originated from. But the most important question here, I want to know by the end of this episode if you too consider yourself to be an energy-sucking vampire like myself. But first, a little shout out. Today, makeup-wise, Haunted Europe, we had to. Nomad Cosmetics came out with this palette last year. Haunted Europe, it's about all things haunted, all things Europe. Perfect, because we're going to be discussing not only Count Dracula, but also another ruler from Romania. You may already know, but he was very gruesome. We'll get into that. But yeah, have this palette on my eyes today. Absolutely love it. There's actually a Count Dracula shade, so I definitely had to use that. On the lips today, I'm being a little bougie, but mine's just a deluxe sample size. This is shade number 1 in the YSL. I can't even pronounce this, it's so fancy. It's their Couture Matte Stain. That's on the lips today. It's very bold, very vibrant. I actually think I wanted a little bit more of like a blood red, but don't worry, we have some blood. Because today, I want to also give you guys some book recs. I am a book lover. I love reading. If you watch my vlogs or my other videos on my YouTube, they're book related a lot of the time if they're not beauty related or hella spooky related. I've been reading a lot of books, and a lot of those books recently have been about vampires. So I have some book recs for you guys before we jump into today's story and scariness. I wanted to let you guys in on some books that you should sink your teeth into. Did I have to go there with the blood? Yes, I did. So you of course need to sink your teeth into Dracula by Bram Stoker. I'm currently listening, or I have been the past 2 weeks. I've kind of been savoring it a little bit. I read probably the first quarter of the book. Now, if you don't read a lot, or you like more of that like modern reading, may not be for you. You know, it's a very, very old book. So a lot of their terms and the way they talk and everything, it's just very older. I find it really interesting because it's almost like, I don't know, it's just like so historically written. It's really cool, but I also love that a lot of the book is written in letters and like telegrams to each character. It's really cool. And just knowing like at that time, like that's how they were able to like talk to each other. They had to wait on letters, and some of it is like these girls writing back and forth to each other. It's like, oh my gosh, I like him so much. Can you imagine having to pour your heart and soul into a letter like that to send it to your best friend and wait for their response? Especially then, like mail takes a decent amount of time now. Not like crazy, but like on something like that, like you cannot wait to hear what they think. Oh my god. Now it's like our friends know in like 2.5 seconds whenever we send a text. What I was saying is I have been listening to this on the audiobook and it's so much better than reading it for me personally. I really liked reading it. I had to definitely set the mood. But there's something about listening to this, it's so good. It's one of those books where it kind of switches from voice to voice too, and I really love that. I feel like you can stay more into such an older story being told when the voices change with the characters. It's one of the first audiobooks I've listened to in years. So I've really been enjoying it. I actually haven't finished it because I've been savoring it, and I listen to it a lot when I'm in the car, which has not been too often lately with the break. So I'm going to finish it this week. So I'm really excited about that, but it's a classic. Another great book is Salem's Lot. Now it is Stephen King. So you guys know, if you follow my book content, you know I'm going to love it because it's Stephen King. But I have to say, it's probably not my all-time favorite from him, but it definitely is up there. I like how spooked you can get during the book, and I feel like there's so much like, I don't know, it just reminds me of like classic horror movies. It's so good. It's so much better than watching it. The movie is a classic, but reading it is a lot more scary. But I feel like Stephen King has always done a really good job at spooking people. Now there is kind of those dynamics even in this book where sometimes do have an issue with like how sometimes the women are portrayed in his books. This one wasn't as bad as some of the other ones. I can give it that, but there was still like a touch of that. But I actually really enjoyed a lot of the characters in this book. And that's not usually something that's very common in a Stephen King book. I think I like Stephen King so much because he has a way of making me always hate his characters, but end up loving the story and feeling spooked. But it's a good vampire read. I recently read A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson, 4 stars. It was a pretty good book. It's another one that kind of has like the historical element. That's why I wanted to mention it next. It involves a vampire who comes along this wounded person and changes them to a vampire to live with them, and they grow old together over centuries. And it kind of has like that romance element to it while being very historical, and you know, it goes from very, very past, like I feel like olden days, to more modern days, and you kind of see how their life evolves, but they also like have additional family members come on, and those family members are not just family. Like, you can't think about like a cult of vampires like the Cullens. You have to think about it as like they're all lovers. So it's kind of like a polygamous relationship, if you will. Now, it's not all romance, but that's pretty much what it's based on. But I liked how the characters' personalities and pretty much the character development throughout it was really nice. I also like to see how the different bonds of them grew in the overall ending. So good. So those are some more current ones that I have been reading or listening to. But I, of course, have to give props to some older ones. Twilight. I feel like it's always going to be kind of a nostalgic moment for me. I've actually been like contemplating picking it up. I have not read any of those books in years. So I kind of want to start the Twilight series again. I always loved them. I think the movies kind of ruined the whole series for me, and then I just kind of had to like back away from them for a while. But now that I've been reading a lot more, I kind of want to go back to some of Stephenie Meyer's works that I did used to really enjoy and love and reread them. Maybe I'll take you guys along with me on that. But I have to mention them. I overall always loved that, and I think it was a huge part of my life that made me go down the rabbit holes of what vampires were, and absolutely loving vampires today. They're still like one of my favorites when it comes to mythical scary creatures. That's where I also have to give props to the Lost Boys. My mom introduced me to the Lost Boys when I was a teenager, and I absolutely loved them so much. I remember my mom is not big on scary movies, so I didn't ever really watch a lot of scary movies with her. It was one of the first ones that I thought was going to be like really scary, and it's not, but it is a classic. It is so good. Amazing actors. One of my favorite vampire stories. It has like that dark side to it, but it has so much humor to it. It's phenomenal. So that's where I can say the movie is 10 out of 10. So good. It's like spot on to the book. And that's why I think I love it so much too. But I have read the book as well, and the book is just as good. They're both amazing. So whether you read or just watch, they're both incredible if you have not read them or watched them. And also my guilty pleasure nostalgic manga, Vampire Knight. It's not for everybody. Even reading it now, it's pretty cheesy, but there's that connection with me and vampires, really feeling it right now. But I just love it. It's a guilty pleasure of mine and one of my favorite all-time manga because of that. Like, I love it so much. There are some recs for you, some book recs. I thought I would have this little segment for you guys every once in a while if I had books that I've read on this certain thing we're talking about. But if you love book content, you should definitely stay on my channel because I post a lot more book content. You can also follow me over on Instagram on my more personal Instagram or lifestyle Instagram. It is AllisonHunt _2, a little different than my beauty content. It's a lot more of just me and my personality and what I like. You can also follow me on Goodreads. I'm going to have that link down below as well. Let's dive into today's spooky story.
Cross my heart and hope to die. I can't fucking sleep at night.
It's always quite humbling to see myself when I edit these and see the full face of makeup and then going to the bare face. But if you're watching, here I am to throw on some makeup today for the tales of Count Dracula. Did you know that the 15th century Romanian prince, Vlad Dracul III, was so bloodthirsty, he could have been what inspired the world-famous vampire, Count Dracula. Vampires are known to be evil, mythical creatures. They live by the night and sleep by the day, searching for people, really, for their blood to feed on. And most of us, when we think about vampires, we think of Count Dracula. Dracula by Bram Stoker was published in 1897. Like, I knew it was old, but I guess I didn't quite put it together that it was 1897. I thought it was like maybe like early, like 1920 something. It's pretty old. You can definitely tell by the writing. But history of the vampire actually started many, many years beforehand, like hundreds of years. The characteristics of a vampire are always something that I am the most intrigued about when it comes to watching a new show or a movie or reading a book that has vampires, because I feel like everybody's interpretation of like a vampire is so different. Like, there's some who can walk through, you know, walk out into the sunlight and be perfectly fine and even sparkle. But then others who literally burn if, you know, their skin goes in the sunlight. You also have Vampire Diaries where they have to have a certain type of stone or wear a certain like piece of stone in their jewelry to be able to walk in the daylight. There's vampires who sleep during the day. Then there's vampires who never sleep at all. There's a lot of different characteristics when it goes into, I feel like, novels and, I mean, what anybody thinks of a vampire. The most common characteristic is that they drink human blood, unless you're a Kulin. Vampires typically drain humans of blood, killing them, or, I guess, or turning them into a vampire as well. In most cases, sunlight seems to weaken them, so they hunt during the night. And some of my favorite to read about is when they have the ability to morph into like a bat. But there's some who is said to morph into a wolf, which is pretty cool too. But you know, bats are just my thing. It's also said that vampires are very charming. They can hypnotize you, and they are supposed to have incredible strength. Another loved one that's in movies or books is when vampires can't see their reflection in the mirror. God, I love that one. You also, of course, have the funnier ones, like they can't be around garlic. So you have like, you know, the vampire hunters who are wearing garlic around their neck or hanging garlic on their door, that type of ordeal. I also love the, like, you have to invite the vampire in before they can come into your house. Man, I could sit here all day and talk about vampires and like the different characteristics that different authors or directors have put into their books and films. It's just so interesting and so cool. But we're gonna go a little bit darker because while vampires became mainstream after Dracula, since then Count Dracula, of course, has been in all kinds of different things. There's been so many spin-offs and different mentions of vampires in so many different media and books. The overall fascination of vampires, like myself and many others, keeps the stories alive and keeps them going. But there is some really dark history to what vampires and what that type of legend came from. While some experts have said that Count Dracula had nothing to do with Vlad the Impaler, there is so many similarities of the two that it's obviously intriguing, but a little hard to pull the two apart in a lot of ways. Vlad Dracul III was born in Transylvania, Romania. He ruled Wallachia, Romania, off and on from 1456 to 1462. And most historians will tell you that he was brutally cruel. There are demons walking the earth. He was one of them. He was a ruler who fought off the Ottoman Empire, and they were one of the mightiest and longest lasting dynasties in the world history. They ruled large areas of the Middle East, Eastern Europe, and North Africa for more than 600 years. But Vlad Dracul III had another name, a nickname that he was called, Vlad the Impaler. And by the name, that is how he got it, by impaling his victims and his enemies. It's said that Vlad would literally impale and kill his enemies and victims with a wooden stake. But the legend goes even further because he would enjoy dining amidst the dying victims. So while they're all staked and impaled, he would just sit there and drink his wine and eat and just have a good dinner. It was his dinner and a show. So you can definitely see some of the similarities when it comes to Count Dracula and Vlad Dracul. Not only the name, but the most common way to kill a vampire is by impaling them with a stake. And the fact that Vlad enjoyed doing it and partaking in it and then literally just sat around and feasted around them, I think is kind of what got the tale going even further. Now, diving a little bit more into the history of Vlad, I did see that while Count Dracula is kind of intertwined with Transylvania, it's said that later in Vlad's life, he didn't have anything to do with Transylvania in general. It's said that he never even lived at the Grande castle, which is a very infamous, and a lot of people believed that he owned that castle, but apparently he did not. So some say. A lot of people say because of where the castle is located and the foggy area that's always around it, it looks really spooky, so it was generally associated with Count Dracula. But they said that Vlad never lived there, he never even stepped foot there. But there is the Corvin Castle, which I've talked about before in my other podcast, Caffeine and Crime. Caffeine and Crime is now true crime based for good, because I'm going to be bringing everything spooky here. And I will be bringing the Corbin Castle to the channel at some point. I definitely want to go back and reuse some of those episodes from spooky seasons because they're just so good. And those places I talked about, I really want to be here on Hella Spooky as well. But I did talk about Corbin Castle, and it is said that Vlad was actually imprisoned by Hungarian Governor John Hunyadi at one point. So Vlad apparently was at Corbin Castle. And going a little bit deeper into Vlad's history, he definitely did have a pretty sad childhood as far as we know of. I feel like there's not really a whole lot to go off of until he was 14 years old. Him and his brother were imprisoned in Turkey. In 2014, archaeologists found what the likely location of the dungeon that they were held in. Castle that is located in northern Turkey. Tokat Castle. They said it's an eerie place with secret tunnels and dungeons that is currently under restoration and open to the public. In 1431, King Sigismund of Hungary, who would later become the Holy Roman Emperor, according to the British Museum, inducted the elder Vlad into the knightly order, the Order of the Dragon. And this is actually when Vlad would get the last name Dracul. The name came from the old Romanian word for dragon, Drac. But that was Vlad II, Vlad the Impaler's father. It's a little confusing, there's so many Vlads. His son, Vlad the Impaler, Vlad III, was later known as son of Dracul. It says in modern Romanian, the word Drac refers to the devil. So in 1442, there was a meeting held with the Ottoman Sultan. This was the Ottoman empire I talked about earlier. You know, the huge one that was Vlad going after them. So Vlad II brought Vlad III, his son, and I guess his other son to this meeting, but it ended up being a trap, and they were imprisoned. They were arrested and held hostage. They ended up letting Vlad II, so the father of the two boys, leave as long as he agreed to leave his two sons there, which apparently they now became royal hostages to the Ottoman court. And it's said that the Sultan held Vlad and his brother hostage to ensure that their father, Vlad II, behaved himself in the ongoing war between Turkey and Hungary. While they were there, the boys were actually tutored in science, philosophy, and the arts. So I guess although they were taken hostage, I guess they were at least taken care of in some ways and still kind of educated. They also became skilled horsemen, and it's said that at that current time, they were actually treated pretty decently. While their father fought hard, he did eventually lose. In 1447, Vlad II was ousted by ruler of Wallachia, and he was killed in a swamp with his own brother. So this kind of triggered something in Vlad III. He wanted to regain his father's seat, from the new ruler, which his name was Vladislav. Why are all their names similar? He was also a second. But Vlad III decided to try to get the throne by relying on other people who were in the military with him. He needed the military support. He also got the support of the Ottoman governor of the cities along northern Bulgaria, but it was also the fact that the current ruler, Vladislav, was also away on a little mission or visiting some other place, working on something at the time away. So Vlad got his father's seat back, but it was only for 2 months because then Vladislav II returned home and regain ownership of it, and little is known about where Vlad was between 1448 and 1456. But it's known that he switched sides. He gave up all ties to the Ottoman Empire, the people who held him captive for all those years. He was known to be in the military and in this like war between the two. There was this Ottoman Empire and Hungarian war and conflict kind of going on. So he was kind of sticking with the Hungarian side. And all of his training from the Ottoman Empire really came into play here. And he was definitely a fighter, that's for sure. He was the forefront amid the fall of Constantinople. So because of this, the Ottomans were in the position to invade all of Europe. In July of 1456, the Hungarians and the Ottomans were at it. And Vlad decides to make a force of the small group of people and kind of like sneak around to where they can kind of like flank, you know? And not only did this work, but he actually got to kill his previous enemy, Vladislav II, who, you know, regained the throne that he wanted. But he also got to kill the person who killed his own father. There's a lot of violence in today's episode. Apparently this was a hand-to-hand combat. But this was really big for Vlad. He was proclaimed voivode of the Wallachia in 1456. One of his first orders of business was to stop paying an annual tribute to the Ottoman Sultan. And this was sort of like a treaty of peace between Wallachia and the Ottomans. So that's kind of breached and not a thing now. And to honor Vlad III and this new position and power that he had as the voivode, he held a banquet and had hundreds of people impaled with the accusation that their shameless disunity was the cause of the frequent changes of the princes in Wallachia. It's said that this is something that took place a lot. It was something that Vlad really enjoyed. In 1460s and 1470s, the invention of the printing press came to be. So now the stories of Vlad were not only being told, you know, person to person, but were now being written in the press and put together by different individuals in pamphlets and printed. Now it's said that some of these might be slightly embellished, might be a little bit more dramatic than what they really were, but there was a lot of different pamphlets going on at the time and what we would call like newspapers, different newspaper companies who were writing almost down to the exact story of what was happening. And they were so gruesome and just terrifying. Some of these legends were also collected and published in the book, The Tale of Dracula, in 1490 by a monk who presented Vlad III as a fierce but just ruler. His words, not mine. He said that although he was gruesome and very cruel, he always commended them on their religious devotion. He had a group of enemies from the Ottoman Empire that he had captured and were going to impale. But when asked, they declined to remove their turbans, citing a religious custom, and he said that they could keep their turbans on. He actually ensured that their turbans would forever remain on their heads by reportedly having the head coverings nailed to their skulls. Oh my god. So that is why the monk says that although he was fierce, he was a just ruler. Another battle took place in June 17th of 1462, known as the Night Attack. It was 3 hours after sunset until about 4 in the morning. This was like in foothills of a mountain. It's an estimate that 5,000 of Vlad's men were lost and 15,000 of the Ottoman Empire were lost. Even historians who research him say that he was always a positive character in Romania. Although he was very harsh and cruel, apparently he was very just for his people. Soon after this war, all the prisoners that they had captured but not had killed were all impaled. In August of 1462, Vlad was once again attacked by the same ruler, Mehmet II, and he was forced into exile in Hungary. He was imprisoned for many of these years, even though during this time he was married and had 2 children. In 1476, Vlad made one last effort to reclaim his seat as ruler of Wallachia. And although he did win back the throne, it was very short-lived. A year later, while going to another battle with the Ottomans, Vlad and a small group of soldiers were ambushed and Vlad was killed. So although Vlad the Impaler was not a vampire himself, he was from Romania, and he was very spooky and very cruel and gruesome in his ways. He was very bloodthirsty and enjoyed his victims, the view of them while he ate his dinner. And it does make you wonder if a lot of that comes, or if that goes into a lot of vampire stories today and has then made the legend grow and grow and grow of what a vampire is. And some people wonder if vampires are real. Are they just mythical creatures, or are they actually real? Because there's a lot of stories out there, from serial killers drinking blood to legends of these underground groups or cults of people who drink blood to, quote, survive. While the superstition was like fully a thing in the Middle Ages, especially at the times when a plague would hit a certain area, it would often leave behind people who were dying and had blood coming out of their mouth. And back then, when there wasn't a lot of knowledge around what creatures were myths and which ones weren't, it was said that this was a sure sign of a vampire. And it wasn't uncommon for people who had physical or emotional illness to be labeled a vampire back then. There's also certain blood disorders that can cause severe blisters on the skin that exposed to sunlight as a disease that might have been linked to the vampire legend. This blood disease, porphyria, symptoms can be temporarily relieved by ingesting blood. Other diseases blamed by promoting the vampire myth include rabies or goiter. In many cases, when these quote-unquote vampire people died, they would drive a stake into their heart to make sure that they sealed the deal, they finished it. Now, there is other stories of decapitation, burning of the bodies of the corpses of those that were suspected to be a vampire. I have to ask if you guys have heard of Mercy Brown. Besides Count Dracula, she is known as one of the most notorious vampires. Mercy was a real person, though. She lived in Exeter, Rhode Island, and was the daughter of George Brown, who was a farmer. And after George lost many family members, including Mercy, in the late 1800s to tuberculosis, his community used Mercy as a scapegoat to explain their deaths. It was common at the time to blame several deaths in one family to the undead, and even the bodies of the family, each of them were exhumed to be used as research for vampirism. And when Mercy's body was exhumed and didn't display severe decay, now it's said scientifically that this was because her body was put into an above-ground vault, and it was during a quote-unquote New England winter, so that was why. It was like she was in an icebox. But the townspeople accused her of being a vampire and making her family sick from her icy grave. They cut her heart out, they burned it, and fed the ashes to her sick brother. He died shortly after. And although now modern science has said there is no vampires, nobody's a vampire, there is blood diseases that are known about, but there is still people who claim to be vampires. I think there always will be. I think it's kind of a vibe, an aesthetic, a mood, style, if you will, which is fine. You do you, as long as you're not harming or forcing someone to give you their blood. You do you. We all will, let the vampires do their thing. But it is strange that there is some people out there who seem normal, but they drink small amount of bloods as a way to stay healthy. There's also communities, apparently, of self-identified vampires. It says that they can be found on the internet and in cities and towns around the world. To avoid rekindling vampire superstitions, most of them keep to themselves and typically conduct their feeding rituals, which include drinking the blood of willing donors in private. As some vampires don't ingest human blood but claim to feed off the energy of others. Mood. I am that type of vampire. I can literally, if somebody let me, I would sleep. I would sleep for days and days and days. And I would be perfectly fine with that. Like, I'd be content. I'd be happy. I could sleep the rest of my life away. If I didn't have kids and I feared of missing out on so much with my little family, I could sleep and sleep and sleep and sleep. If somebody was like, we will pay you to do this scientific study and you have to sleep for 30 days straight, sign me up. I'm ready. But I feel that. Feed off the energy of others. I feel that. I think I am an energy feeder vampire. Many of these type of vampires state that if they don't feed regularly, they become agitated or depressed. I get it. Talk about lipstick on teeth. Popping in some fangs to make this look complete. Also getting lipstick all over the fangs. And if you're just listening, I apologize because it's actually quite difficult talking normally with fangs in your mouth. It's a mood though. You guys are gonna have to let me know what you think. After all the legends that we went through today about Vlad the Second, Vlad the Third, the Impaler, to Count Dracula, all of those are super interesting, but I think what I want to know more than anything is, what is your favorite characteristics of a vampire? Like, when you're watching a movie or reading a book, what are the characteristics that gets you hyped with vampires? Like, or which ones get you bummed out? Because there's some that I'm just like, oh, that kind of bums me out. Like, I personally like that vampires can't go out during the sunlight, that it burns their skin. I personally really like that characteristic, but I do kind of let it slide with Vampire Diaries because I do love me some Vampire Diaries. You can also let me know who is your favorite vampire of all time. I mean, I might have to give it to the Count himself, but the Lost Boys, oh my god. They kind of have my heart too. They're kind of like the turned down outcast that are known as the bad boys, and they have my heart. I hope you guys enjoyed this bloodthirsty episode of Hella Spooky, and I will see you guys next time with less teeth, for sure.
Jump the gun and take what's mine. Looking like you seen a ghost, moving like a poltergeist. Wait, what's his name? I'm like, what'd he say, bitch? I don't want you to